Chapter 1. Saffron, the Western Archipelago. I leaped off the cliff. The branches of the trees and small shrubs whipped and snapped at my bare calves, biting into my skin. Stray twigs snatched at my hair. I didn't care. I should have trembled with fear, but I didn't. Without anyone to teach me, this was the only way to test my magical abilities. It was a dangerous decision, but I'd never felt more alive. Holding my arms outstretched in the perfect imitation of the diving, shrieking seabirds that flocked to our shores, I flew like a dragon. Images snapped at me. Blue sky, white sun, cold air. Time slowed. The pounding of my heart proved I was still alive, even as it drowned out the haunting calls of the birds behind me. Below me, the broad expanse of the great western ocean spread out like a blanket. The distant islands were little more than dots in the distance. No ships rode the waves. The sea was flecked with white spray, and I could even pick out the smaller shapes of the seabirds the size of butterflies beneath me. How high up was I? Panic pressed at me. This was the highest I had ever dived from, only I wasn't diving anymore. Looking around had caused my body to shift and turn, then spin and tumble. I was falling. With half a scream, I twisted and righted myself. I let out a whoop as I dove again for the water. Energy surged through me as the water and rocks rose up to meet me faster and faster. I was like one of the great dragons. The crashing froth of waves lashed onto the rocky coastline of my island. What had old Zanima told me? Hands forward, breathe, be like the gulls. Zanima, the matriarch dragon, was always wise. Despite the centuries that lay on her, she could still dive as elegantly as any seabird. I tried to shape my body as she had instructed, but my speed and the wind pulled my legs and my arms out of place. It tugged on the clothes Zanima insisted I wear and whipped my hair across my eyes so I couldn't see where I was aiming. And there were rocks down there.
"Foolish child!"
A female voice rang in my ears and heart. A shape swooped down like an arrow out of the sun. "Jadra!" I gasped out the word, but the wind tore it away. Flipping first one way and then another, Jadra, the blue-green sea dragon, my den sister, sought to match my dive. She was trying to save me. She was my closest friend and ally on the island. I'd grown up with her, and she even brought me food when I was ill. But could she save me now from my own foolishness? The world passed by me quickly as I flipped and turned. Blue skies, gray sea, black rock. I was falling faster now and almost out of control. If I hit rock, I was going to die. Closing my eyes against the onrushing sea, I felt for the crystal clear knowing within my heart. It was the same feeling I got on Jadra's back or when I ran as fast as I could. The power of the magic that coursed through my veins was always waiting to bubble up. I didn't really know what it was or where it came from, only that in some extreme situations it could pour out of me. I had only moments before I would be dashed on the rocks below. I willed my mind into the trance, and my hands moved in complicated patterns of their own accord. Jadra snarled and gave a low roar. My eyes flew open as power poured from my fingertips. A bolt of golden light hit Jadra squarely on the chest. The wrong direction. Power erupted from my fingertips, blowing both of us apart. My fall became a slow arc away from the rocks, and Jadra flew back, spiraling across the sea like a skimmed stone. "Jadra!" I screamed at my sister dragon seconds before I hit the water. Cold slammed into me, knocking the air from my lungs. Salt water gushed into my nose and mouth, bitter and chilled. I tumbled head over heels, every muscle straining and every joint aching. I knew Jadra had been thrown across the waves, but in my mind, I could see her with her leathery wings wrapped around her protectively as she plunged into the sea, sending up a wall of water in her wake. I could feel her impressions as she hit the water. White water, warm water, pain. Jadra, daughter, Saffron, child. Zanima's voice rippled across my mind. The den mother of the dragons that nested in the clutch in Den Mountain must have heard our terrified thoughts. But I had other things to worry about. I rolled in the sea, fighting to swim, my lungs burning. At last, I reached up to break the surface with one of my hands. Dizzy and hurting, all I could think about was Jadra. Was she alive? Had I killed her with the risk I'd taken to unleash my uncontrolled magic? A shadow eclipsed the sun, and bands of soft iron wrapped around my torso. Claws the size of my thighs lifted me from the sea. Coughing and sputtering, I came out of the waves. Saffron golden hair, what have I told you about using your magic without guidance? Zanima admonished me, her thoughts stern and patient. She carried me over to the nearest beach. Jadra stood on the white sand already, her tail still draped into the low surf. Zanima dropped me unceremoniously down. Air and seawater rushed out of my lungs. My mouth tasted like salt and sand, and I felt as if I had just been through a whirlpool, but nothing was broken. When the ringing in my ears started to fade and I stopped coughing, I looked over to where Zanima was nuzzling her much smaller daughter, Jadra, checking that she hadn't ripped or torn her wings. Water streamed off Jadra's bright blue-green scales, and her golden-green eyes were near closed with pain. My chest tightened. I pushed up on one fist on the sand and faced Jadra. I am so sorry. I should never have tried to dive off the sea cliff. I thought I could use my magic to— You thought to use magic you have never been trained in? Zanima's thoughts reached me in an even tone. She wasn't angry, but I caught a blast of cold disapproval that made me wince. Having any dragon annoyed at you was scary, but Zanima was taller than a house, longer than the entire nearby human village, each leg wider than the island's palm trees. She had teeth as long as my forearm and silver eyes like sparkling mother of pearl. She was a rare, gigantic white dragon. At this close distance, the fading sunlight caught every scale on Zanima's face, brushing the white with a fiery red. She shone, always bright and gleaming. But she bore signs of age, too. Ancient scars of busted scales which had broken and fused or formed multiple mini scales across her snout, jawline, and down her neck. Zanima. Crawling to my feet, I stood on shaky legs and bowed deeply. You are right. I almost killed us both. Child. She sighed, and her reptilian voice reverberated through my mind like sunlight on a drowsy afternoon in the Clutch Caverns. You know I care for you, bringing you into my clutch as if you were my own. But I feared this. Your magic grows too strong. It pulls at you and must be used. You've become a danger to your den brothers and sisters. Magic will control you and destroy all if you do not first learn its secrets. Such has happened before. I couldn't argue with her. My natural magic, what I thought of as dragon tricks, had been appearing more frequently of late and at odd times. Recently, I'd blown Jadra off course and into a storm when I'd gotten frightened. And the last time I'd been angry, I'd flattened an entire stand of palm trees. I wiped a hand down my soggy, baggy trousers. I was becoming a danger to the only family I had ever known, and now, just like the human parents who had abandoned me, Zanima would want me gone too. Saffron, daughter, you must be brave. Zanima curled her tail protectively around me, even as she stayed close to Jadra. Warmth radiated from her body. Was I not the one who found you in the cave so long ago? You would not cry or mewl, but looked me in the eyes, and I knew you would be special. When the other dragons hissed, it was I who snarled at them to leave you alone. Before you were old enough, I would find you riding Jadra's back as she taught herself to fly. I know the strength in you, Saffron. You must use all of that strength to master the magic inside your blood. But how? I blurted the words out, feeling childish and sounding petulant even to myself. You just said it. I was abandoned in a cave by parents who obviously couldn't care for me. They were probably afraid of me. How am I going to find out why I have this magic? I almost stamped my foot. I felt so desperate. Almost, because one does not stamp at a dragon. The answer is in your blood. Zanima pulled me closer to her with her tail. You must find where you come from. It is time. I looked at Jadra, still snuffing seawater out of her lungs. What if one of these days I really hurt one of the dragons? Zanima was right. I had to go. I had to find out who I was for my own sake, if not for theirs. I nodded and wiped the salt water from my face. I wasn't going to call it tears. Come, I will take you to the place where it all began. Maybe you will find the answers you seek there. Zanima uncurled herself and leaped into the air as fast and agile as one of the forest cats. She swept me up in her claws. Below us, Jadra chirruped mournfully, but she did not follow. I knew she was still hurting from her fall. The island forest swirled away, the greens and browns growing smaller as the den mother's powerful wings lifted me into the sky. I didn't want to go back, but I had no choice. After we had flown a long distance and I had shifted so I was now riding astride her, Zanima's thoughts filtered into my mind. Humans, Saffron. You must go to where the humans live. There are many, many more of your kind out there, and not one of them wants anything to do with dragons. Her sadness lingered in my mind. Glancing down at the vast sea below us, I wondered about her words. More humans like those in the island villages? Why did they fear dragons? I had always known there were other humans. Jadra and I had watched the sailors on the boats that were always coming and going to the islands. To me, they all seemed crude, loud, and noisy, not true dragon friends. Den Mountain and the surrounding forests were my home, and I had no interest in smelly old boats or tiny huts. But now I wondered about them. What did those humans do? Who was their head woman? Was she like Zanima? And why did Zanima want to take me to where things began? What did that even mean? The questions left me dizzy and uncertain. They left me wondering if I even belonged with dragons, which was ridiculous. I had been with Zanima for longer than I could remember, and I had been riding dragons for almost all that time. Of course, faint memories stirred. A crib, soft blankets, a woman's voice. No, that was no memory. It was a nightmare of being a baby, the sounds of fighting and the horrible crunch of metal, a woman crying as she ran, only to stumble and fall. Zanima had tried to cure me of that terrible dream. She told me a dragon had swooped down to save me, and now there was no need to dream of such horrors ever again. Even so, I shivered and leaned closer to Zanima's neck to let her warmth brush against my chest and face. And I ignored the fear nibbling at me that there really had been a battle and humans and angry people, and a woman's voice I would never hear again. Some of my fear must have spilled into Zanima. She wobbled in her flight and wheeled down to a distant shingle beach. I clutched tightly at her scales. Zanima landed on the beach, and the rocks clattered under her claws. I slipped from her back. A wind blew cold off the sea, and the sound of the waves was low and hushed, like a dragon's breathing. Her thoughts came to me, soothing and calm. "Here, child. I found you just here on the teeth of a storm, wrapped up in the scrap of cloth that you still carry." My hand went to my belt and the pouch that hung next to my knife. I'd made the pouch myself, patterned after those I'd seen all the island villagers wearing. It contained everything I owned: a dragon's baby tooth, a few shells, some of the colored rocks from the island's many caves, a sewing kit that had been found with me, and a scrap of cloth, threadbare and barely bigger than my palm. It was only a fragment of the blanket I'd once been wrapped in. I'd used it over the years to patch my clothes, for Zanima insisted humans had skins that were too soft and easily damaged without coverings. I knew if I brought the cloth into the light, I could just make out the name stitched in gold. Amelia. I thought I could remember the smell of a woman's hair, earthy and slightly fragranced with lavender. I hoped it had been my mother's name and that she had left this with me so I might know her. I wanted to think she had not willingly left me. But the old anger and hurt rose, bitter in my mouth and hot in my chest. My father and mother had left me. Amelia. My mother's name is Amelia. And now I was even angrier at Zanima for bringing me back to this spot. The beach stood empty, with sheer cliffs between us and the rest of the island. Just behind us stood the cave, a shallow, high-mouthed cavern where I had been left 17 years ago and barely able to walk. I put my back to the cave and stared out at the green-blue sea and the white foam of the low surf. You think that until I find out about my human family, who I am and where I'm from, I'll never be able to control my magic. That makes no sense. I don't need to know where my magic comes from. I just need... I let the words trail off. What did I need? I knew the answer, but I dared not say it aloud. I wanted to hide the thought that plagued me. What if I could find my parents and they were still alive and searching for me? Glancing down, I kicked at one of the smooth rocks on the beach. Zanima nudged me with her nose, urging me to turn and look toward the cave. I hesitated, but Zanima kept shoving. It looked like any other sea cliff cave, weathered, old, and dark. The droppings of seabirds whitened the top of the cave, but the birds knew better than to fly near a dragon. I couldn't see or hear them now. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and the light fell into the cave, slanting low and golden. Something odd stood out at once inside the cave's walls. Lines in the rocks that had a moment ago seemed random began to take shape. "What is that?" I breathed out the words. Behind me, Zanima kept silent. I stepped closer. The light in the cave brightened even more. Curves and swirls took shape, and one stood out more than the others. An elongated arrow I knew so well because I had drawn and redrawn it again and again. That shape had been in my dream. Other shapes began to form in the slanting golden sunlight. Dragons! I let out another breath. My heart was pounding now. These weren't the dragons of the Western Archipelago. Tall dragons and thin dragons, fat dragons and squat dragons had been carved into the cave walls. I suddenly knew they wouldn't be the predominant whites and sea blues of the dragons here on the island. They would be orange, green, and even red. Stepping closer, I walked up to the cave and squinted at the images. They were starting to fade now as the light changed, but I could see something else. I put a hand on the carvings and traced the lines. Whoever had carved these lines into the cave wall had added human figures riding dragons just as I rode Jadra. But the carvings had 2 people on every dragon. Dragon riders. The words came out of me in a startled gasp. I turned fast to face Zanima. "Why did you never show me this before?" Zanima snorted. "The time is not always now for everything." I rolled my eyes and waved at the carvings. "Don't you see? This means there are others like me. There are others who live with dragons, so I really do belong somewhere."
Saffron belongs with Jadra.
The blue-green Jadra settled onto the rocky beach. She shook herself, and a slight tremor ran along her scales as if she were a bird ruffling her feathers. Head high, she stared at her mother. Zanima stared back, her silver eyes glittering. Her thoughts carried a stern warning. "Jadra, stay away. Saffron must do this on her own." Jadra snorted, and a small puff of steam warmed the air.
Jadra and Saffron are den sisters. Where Saffron goes, Jadra goes.
Jadra raised a foreleg and thumped it down on the rocks, which scattered, some skipping into the sea. For a long moment, Zanima looked at Jadra. At last her head lowered and she nodded. "It is done, then. Already bonded and become one as in the old days." Zanima turned her head to glance at me, and it flashed into my thoughts that she seemed a little pleased as well as sad. "The choice is made. None can stop you." My throat tightened. My breath caught in my chest. My world was changing. I knew it. A new destiny tugged at me. I waved at the carvings inside the cave. It wasn't just dragons and riders that had been carved here. Dragons flew over undulating lines that almost looked like tall waves, but I knew these were mountains. I pointed at one of the mountains, the tallest one that showed caves and smaller dragons, and what looked like the biggest village I had ever seen. "You think, Zanima, that I should find my own kind. Well, if I have a kind, if anyone knows about my magic, it will be at that place. I'm sure of it." Jadra echoed my words with a cough of flame and smoke into the salt-tinged air. Zanima nodded again. "I cannot direct you to your destination. This is something you must do without my help. To get there, you must follow your magic, not some map to a place long since changed. Let it lead where it must, but do not let it control you. You must learn to work with it. Be safe, my daughters. Be wise and strong." Jadra picked her way across the rocks and stopped at my side. We both glanced at Zanima as she took to the sky, her strong wings beating the air, leaving me clutching at my hair and Jadra's eyes glinting with tears. I knew in my heart I was saying farewell to all I had known. My heart thudded slow and hard, and I wanted to call out to Zanima that I would not go. But I must. I had to learn about my magic. Even more so, I had to find others who knew what it was to ride a dragon. I put a hand on Jadra's warm scales. All the questions I had about my past would have to wait. For now, we had to find a mountain like the one carved into the cave walls. It called to me, and I knew without a doubt that I would find answers there. But where would we even start with such a search?